While pretending to be primary aim to fight violence, the treaty in fact includes a number of measures which result in weakening of the natural model of family and imposition of ideological premises in process of implementation of its provisions, in particular within the system of education. Therefore, it is an exemplificatory tool of destruction and of distorting language of human rights, being used to undermine family and family relations. Moreover, we witness growing pressure on countries to ratify that instrument. For instance, just 2 days ago, the European Parliament adopted a resolution in which it calls on the Council to urgently conclude the EU ratification of the Istanbul Convention without any limitations, and to advocate its ratification by all the member states. Such pressure confirms the need for urgent reaction, aiming also to restore original meaning of human rights language, which originally was linked to reason and conscience, and was anchored in something higher than pure will of lawmakers. That pressure shows also that can be stopped only if we have alternative to that Istanbul Convention. And indeed, we do have such alternative, namely Convention on the Rights of the Family. Drafted by Ordo Iuris, Convention is the world's first draft agreement guaranteeing basic rights and freedom of the most discriminated social groups, namely the family. The Convention on the Rights of the Family codifies the fundamental values underlying all civilized societies, of which only some enjoy the protection of international law and national constitutions at present. These values include, among others, protection of human life from conception to natural death, recognition of the family as the best development environment for the child, or protection of the identity of marriage. Unfortunately, although many of these values have been expressed in international law, they often remain empty declarations. Therefore, it is necessary to adopt a new global agreement that will raise current standards and provide families with real guarantees that their rights will be protected. For those who are not familiar with the document mentioned, with the family of the rights of the family, it includes 52 articles which set forth precise definitions of the child well-being, sex, marriage, family, violence, and domestic violence. It consists of 5 chapters. Just to mention as shortly as possible, children is the first chapter, in which it states that in order to develop its personality in a full and harmonious manner, the child should grow in a natural family setting, filled with happiness, love, and understanding. Then it goes to second chapter, which is marriage. The Convention lays down the definition of marriage and provides special protection to marriage, family and parenthood, with a view to strengthening the family integrity. Then we have family and parenting, in which it lays down the basis of social recognition and support for large families and ensure the respect of parents' rights to the upbringing of the child in line with their beliefs. And the last chapter is violence. The CRF, the Convention, ensures the protection against domestic violence and forms of abuse which cause prejudice to family life. It presents an assessment of real root causes of violence and provides for a wide support for its victims. That convention, that drafted document, has the number of advantages among Istanbul Convention. First of all, it is rooted in a better diagnosis of the problem. It's rooted in reality, not in ideology. In countries which, in their system of countering violence, have been relying for years on the ideological model set forth by Istanbul Convention, instead of decreasing abuse cases, are on the rise. In that countries, the percentage of women who had been victims of violence is 2.5 times higher than, for instance, in Poland. That shows that the convention that was drafted by Ordo Iuris in cooperation in other organizations, that was presented on a number of conferences, and that was discussed within an international society with representatives of international organizations, members of parliament. It's a tool that should be supported for and supported by the local organizations, the number of NGOs. Therefore, I would like to start the discussion, and I propose to think over the need and the other reasons for implementing and for advocating for that convention.
Just by the way of introduction, few more remarks regarding the subject. I think that countering Istanbul Convention, which is ideological document, is not the only or even not the most important reason why a covenant on family rights is necessary or is desirable. I remember yesterday's remark by Roman Joch regarding the classical vision of human rights, and this very apt observation that classical liberals probably never thought that such basic unit as family could be undermined, and its autonomy and identity can be questioned one day. So to think about the international framework of human rights protection without thinking of the rights of family is just very much fragmentary. It doesn't recognize the actual anthropology, the nature of man and the society. The other reason why this proposal is that much important would be the fact that we are facing problems regarding not only autonomy, but also identity of the family. So on the one hand, there is this Barne-Verne model, the model of child protection services, which has went the furthest in probably in Norway, but it's implemented in many countries all over Europe, children being taken away, and in simple terms, Istanbul Convention is more or less about replying this model, about copying this model all over Europe. But on the other hand, there is this idea of undermining the notion of the family, notion of marriage, questioning its character, and it has happened already in most countries of Western Europe. Right now, the debate is ongoing in central part of our continent. So I think it's enough of the explanation. In terms of the strategy is, of course, not only about implementing binding legal measures, binding legal documents. It always takes years to work on draft conventions, and it's something quite usual. But what we can think of already at this point as a roadmap to adopt this convention, starting with a joint declaration, joint statement of a number of countries, let's say from Central Europe. So this is my...
Yeah. I would just add that it refers to a number of issues that are discussed nowadays. We all are aware about this discussion of the identity of marriage, about so-called same-sex marriage, about the rights of parents, about euthanasia and other bioethical problems. So those issues that are discussed to some extent separately are collected and are referred to in that document under the name of the Convention of the Rights of the Family, because all of them are related to the family. So we intend that document to be that kind of draft that would address all of them at one point, at one time, and therefore it makes a kind of road and direction in which we should, I guess, follow, and that's what also makes that convention such an important document.
We'll need a microphone just for the sake of translation. Since without the microphone, I know that if we hear each other, but microphone translation is going to be extremely difficult. So let's start the discussion.
Thank you. I'll break the ice. Just two things I consider important. I don't know how to start, but just pinpoint two important things. Is it better English or Spanish?
English.
Okay. Is the concept of fatherhood. There are some lines in America, psychological studies, namely Divine Mercy University in Virginia, led by the Legionaries of Christ. It's a great institution. I think it was born in just 15 years ago. And there are eminent professors there studying, among other things, fatherhood. How children without the presence of the father, either because father is not present, dead, or he works too many hours outside the home, or there is a divorce and doesn't see the kids, or the kids don't see the father. So children without the father suffer from many psychological problems. Homosexual tendency included among those possible problems for a lack of identity. That's one thing I don't see very much pursued or studied in Europe or the countries I know of. One, Dr. Paul Witz, who is an emeritus professor of University of New York and now at Divine Mercy University, studies a lot these lines. I interviewed him, by the way, in 2016. But he was back in Barcelona to speak in a Congress of Christian Anthropology, and then to Pamplona, Madrid, speaking about these books he's written on the importance of this aspect. This is one thing. And another thing is, for example, in Spain, as an anecdote, the Secretary of State, I think she's the Secretary of State for Education, Cela is her name, she said, invited by the main association of Catholic schools in Spain, she said to the people present there that the right to choose the education of the children is not such a right. The parents don't have a right to choose the education of the children. Of course, that caused a reaction of complaints. In the Spanish Constitution, this right is fittingly acknowledged, of course. So for me, two important things are these: the fatherhood aspect, the presence of the father as a model for the child. If the father is there to not present physically, there has to be an uncle or a grandfather or a male figure that gives him the identity, the contraposition of masculine and feminine. And then the right to education, to choose the education you want. Thank you.
Any notes, ideas?
I just want to say that it's hard to disagree with what you said. I mean, the role of the father is crucial, and I mean, there's a lot of scientific proofs of that statement. That without father, the children, the development of children is to some extent harmed. And that children that grows without father were, I mean, harmed in many ways, and the outcomes of that children are very often significantly lower than those child that was brought up by both parents. So that's definitely truth, and in that convention also relates to that problem and confirms and reaffirms that basic truth that the role of the father is absolutely crucial. It also refers to what you said, the discussion about the identity of marriage, changing the definition of marriage would eventually lead to families without father, and it would lead the state to, it would withdraw the state from its role of protecting family. If the family can be the unit composed of two women, then and that definition is supported by the state. So there is no basis for the state for trying to provide the child with the father. So that would be one of the basic consequences of losing the debate over marriage.
Yes, I think that we can. I think that we can share our thoughts regarding the deficits, not only about the draft convention or the proposed legal instruments that already exist, but we can share general thoughts about the deficits of protection, legal protection of family, and current threats to it in general.
Thank you. I know that the draft of the Charter of the Rights of Family exists, and I remember that you have asked MEPs to propose that in the European Parliament. And I would like to ask you for the next steps. It's quite likely that it will be rejected in the European Parliament, according to the contemporary power distribution in the European Parliament. What would come next? I suppose that your national parliament will approve that. Would you suggest it to other national parliaments in European countries to adopt it? Which I would recommend, of course, at least to those most sympathetic for the beginning. And the question is, are you going to propose it at the UN? I don't know how countries from other parts of the world than postmodern West would react. I mean, Muslim countries or African countries, maybe some Asian countries. Have you considered the strategy that the majority of countries in the UN could approve that?
In terms of strategy, thank you very much for that question. I fully agree that the current situation in the European Union leaves us virtually no chance of accepting this document in the European legislative process. I think that the European Parliament or the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe can just serve as a potential fora of debate regarding family rights, since it's just not happening. We have 1,000 other topics which are of lesser importance are being debated in Brussels or in Strasbourg. But family rights are hardly mentioned in the discussions taking place out there. So in terms of our activities in the European Parliament and in the pace, then we think mostly about starting a debate, organizing sessions of working groups or side events promoting this idea. But I fully agree with 100% agree with your observation that if there is a chance of moving forward with this project, with this draft in serious political terms, it's about national states. And my general observation is that most Central European countries or Central Eastern European countries could be potentially parties to the document, even in the text that has been already drafted. Maybe it could be one day also the case of Italy, since Italy is one of those places, one of those countries in Western Europe in which identity of family hasn't been, let's say, entirely questioned. The marriage is still being defined as a union between a man and a woman, although there are, let's say, some exceptions. There is, as we know, just like in Czech Republic, there is a special institution that has been introduced, something between marriage and informal union. But still, it's Central European countries that can be the potential starting point. The parliaments of those countries, we have already presented in different combinations the draft convention in places like Hungary, Slovakia, right now we are speaking about it in Rome, but it has been discussed in one of the working groups of the Romanian parliament. It was also discussed in Vilnius, in Lithuania, and in most of those places we can find at least few MEPs or MPs that are sympathetic of the project. It's always about finding champions, people who can actively get involved in the cause, which is the primary and the most important task if we think about proceeding with something. So we have already people, we have already NGOs that are sympathetic of this. We already have identified MPs, members of national parliaments, who are sympathetic of this project. And I also agree with this observation regarding the UN. UN as a structure, UN as a kind of bureaucratic framework, to use these words. I don't think it's going to be willing to accept this kind of proposal. Of course, there is an institution like the Focal Point on Family that has started a number of UN resolutions regarding family issues, family policies within past few decades. And it wouldn't be right to say that UN entirely ignores family. Still, the institutional framework sometimes puts forward rational proposals, combining them with ideological ones. So, importance of family is stressed, but at the same time, such notions as different kinds of families appear. So I think it's not the proper strategy to start with the institutional framework of the UN, maybe with side events or things like that, but rather with the particular countries, all over the world. And as I said in the very beginning, it's not necessary to, or it's not the only aim that we have to adopt this convention as such. On the roadmap, we can see a number of potential points. If you look at the process, how conventions have been adopted in the past, how international conventions have been adopted, it usually started with declaration. Like in case of the Convention of the Rights of the Family, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1989, I think, and it was already 30 years prior to that date when the Declaration on the Rights of the Child was agreed in the same forum. So the first point could be a joint declaration, a joint statement by a number of countries all over Europe, and then maybe creating a common platform on family, organizing a series of conferences devoted to this topic. It will be already something, maybe starting joint policies in order to counter the ideology coming from Norwegian Barnevernet. There's a lot of money being spent on exporting this ideology to a number of countries through Norwegian funds. Maybe it would be an apt idea to have a declaration on the rights of family and systematically, internationally counter this proposal, which is already pursued, which is already fostered on the international level.
I would add that also we are very well aware that it is highly unlikely that the countries of Western Europe will adopt that document. Still, there is a number of reasons to start campaigning in favor of that convention. One of them is simply to present the alternative to that mentioned at the beginning, Istanbul Convention. I fully agree with Timotheusz that this is not the basic reason for which we drafted the convention, but nevertheless, it is a huge topic, that Istanbul Convention, and so far, without our proposition, there is no alternative. So that's also the advantage of starting the discussion and showing that the point of view that is presented by the authors of Istanbul Convention is not the sole one, it's not the only one, and there is a better solution, there is an alternative that we present, and only this one thing allows us to change the level of the discussion from the level on which there is no alternative to the level on which there are two different points of view. So that's at least another advantage of campaigning in favor of the convention.
Just one more remark. The convention could be treated as a final goal, but as we look at the big picture at this point, maybe it would be enough to establish a common platform for parliamentarians working for family rights from countries like Czech Republic, Poland, Italy. In each of our countries, there are people who are committed to the cause of protection of family, but they rarely work together. On the other side, there's already a group on reproductive and sexual rights that is very active and has its members in virtually all countries of Europe. They are usually radical minorities in their own parliament, but thanks to this joint platform, they can be effective on an international level.
Yes, we are in many countries still majority, but the majority that is not organized, that is not connected in networks, which is a completely different situation than the mentioned leftist organizations. So that would be the occasion to starting that kind of networks in which local groups, international groups could cooperate in favor of the values that are put into that convention.
So we are desperately waiting for your contributions.
Ok, grazie. E io invece volevo parlare a proposito della violenza sulle donne. Ringrazio questo convegno che è stato molto utile per noi ad aiutarci, ma purtroppo condivido quello che ha detto il Signore e l'altro Signore, quello che si dovrebbe creare, perché vediamo quante donne sono ammazzate. Noi viviamo in un piccolo paese cittadina di Rieti e anche l'altro giorno abbiamo potuto assistere a un fatto proprio con 2 bambini terrorizzati, usciti fuori dalle casa, la mamma che ammazza il marito, questa volta non che il marito ammazza la moglie. Ma come si può fare? Il Signore aveva ragione, cerchiamo di creare qualcosa, qualche istituzione, non parlare soltanto a distanza, formare le leggi, perché per quando noi possiamo chiamare la polizia, possiamo chiamare gli aiuti, per le persone così, che sono abituate a picchiare, a buttarti fuori dalla casa, a buttarti fuori anche dal tetto buttarti, ammazzarti, non ci mettono niente. E per quando arriva la polizia a tutti è successo. Diversamente si può fare. Nel senso creare queste piccole associazioni ed operare, andare nelle proprie case come facciamo noi, naturalmente come gruppo di preghiera, andare ad aiutare, a far capire, perché a volte una parola detta giusta al momento giusto salva la vita di una persona, una parola detta sbagliata, veramente succede una catastrofe. Allora è stato un bellissimo convegno, sono stata presente tutti i 2 giorni qui, l'altro giorno sono stata a Subiaco, e tutte bellissime idee, ma secondo me, ma che non ha voce in capitolo perché io non faccio parte del governo, eccetera, ma sono tutte belle iniziative, favolose, ma bisogna passare all'atto pratico, secondo il mio modesto parere, secondo il parere di tutti quelli che io sento, passare a creare delle associazioni che vadano personalmente a interessarsi dei casi così delicati, allora un poco si risolvono un poco alla volta e ci estendiamo sempre di più, sempre allargandoci e naturalmente sempre con l'aiuto del nostro Signore.
I mean, you started with the example of the wife who murdered her husband. It definitely happens, but from the statistical point of view, if we look at the society as a whole, we cannot but notice that the most safe place for women is marriage. We have and for men, we have found out. I mean, we have found the statistics. It's by the way, it wasn't so hard to find them. That shows clearly that, as I said, marriage is the safest place for both women and men. I have charts here. I'm not sure whether you can see that, but you can see here's the place where married women, and this strip shows the statistics of unmarried women with child. So it's uncomparable. And it's, there are a number of charts that we provided with the convention. So the main thing that we should do is to start, to reinforce the institution of marriage. Of course, at the local level, every initiative that lead to direct work with marriages, with couples, is needed. But as far as we are concerned, as far as legal think tank is concerned, and we are legal think tank, we can propose the system solutions, the solutions on the level of legislation, on the level of global politics, and if you want to engage in supporting that activity, and I repeat it, we deeply believe that it's crucial to start with systematic solutions. Then it is crucial to discuss with members of parliament, to start organizations that would advocate that kind of changes in law. And if the law and if the laws are drafted correctly, if the laws legal system protects marriage, then the statistics and that kind of example that you have made would definitely be less often. So what we can recommend is just to start supporting that kind of amendments, start discussion, start lobbying, and keep pressing members of parliament in order to make appropriate changes in the law, and at the same time creating the organizations that are working with directly with that kind of men and women is also beneficiary. Absolutely. So I cannot but support your work in that area.
Yes. Just short remark. In addition, for those of you who are not associated in any group, I think that many of us at this conference are active in public life, but for those of you who are not, I fully agree with this proposal to associate and to influence the public and social life, since I think that the times in which lay Christians could leave things of public importance just to the institutional church are long gone. Nowadays, with the challenges ahead of us, we can be sure that it's not enough to think that the institutional church will do something for us instead of us, and we can just leave it to the clergy. We have to cooperate, but we have to establish initiatives started by lay Christians, it's for sure.
Okay, so I have the microphone and I'm gonna use it. Of course, I of course agree that there's no place for violence in general. But I mean, in Poland, for example, we have a problem that for us, there are no differences between domestic violence. I mean, in the law between domestic violence and the violence in families, which causes, as Mr. Doroshinsky said, the problem that cohabitants are treated the same way as marriages, while between cohabitants there are much more violence than between married people. And well, as it was said in one old Chinese statement, or Confucius, I guess, that the beginning of wisdom is to call things by the proper name. Maybe that's the beginning, just to call that the proper name. So this is probably the role of the convention, to give some definitions, and then we can start doing something in real. But we have to have that background, I guess.
By the way, with regard to your remark concerning local activities and the question what we can do, I think that we can share with you one of activity that we started in Poland in Ordo Iuris. We drafted another document, which is called Local Charter of Rights of Family. So in terms of doing something on the local level, you can create that kind of charter that would be adopted by local government. And in that document, that charter, that would be stipulated the certain obligations for local authorities. For instance, in the area of education, I'm not well aware of how the situation looks like in Italy, but I suppose it's not so far different from what we observe in Poland, namely the activity of non-governmental organizations that desperately want to teach children about sexuality. So they are constantly trying to get into the school and provide lessons for them. The problem is that the content of that lessons is radically different from what the parents would like to teach their children. So there's a lot of efforts made by, among others, also Ordo Iuris, to protect and to support parents who would like to be defended against that activities of leftist organization. So one of the tools that we use is that local charter of rights of the family, which stipulates that the local government is responsible for protecting the rights of parents. And I guess it's one of the most pressing issue and most related directly to ordinary citizens, to people like most of us who are in this hall. So yeah, I guess that's the area of activities that all of us could quite easily start to run and start to protect children and develop the tools for the parents to protect children from being affected by the activities of leftist organizations.
Just a few words, if I may, about who is on the other side, perhaps to make the discussion a little bit lighter, because sometimes it's quite funny. And I will tell you a story about newly, freshly elected one of the Polish MEPs, who is considered in Poland to be someone like living caricature of the most leftist person you can imagine. Unfortunately, she was for quite a long time deputy Polish ombudsman. Her name is Sylwia Spurek. This is a person who quite seriously says something like, we should stop drinking milk because milk cows are being raped so that they can be milked. And I'm not joking. This is something that she said quite seriously. And some time ago, she gave an interview in one of the Polish newspapers, quite a sincere interview, in which she talked about also her personal matters. And she has a partner, and she was asked, of course it's a partner, it's not a husband, they are not married. And she was asked by the interviewer, why don't you get married? And she answered again, quite seriously, statistics show that in marriage, the probability of being killed by your spouse is much higher. So that's why I don't get married. Yes, and this shows the intellectual level of people who are on the other side. Unfortunately, this is a very good example because she was elected to the European Parliament, and she, as I said, she also used to be deputy Polish ombudsman. So we have to, I think, realize quite well who is on the other side. And no matter how we think, I'm going to be blunt, how we think this person or these people are stupid, they have some powers, they have posts, official posts, and they get elected by people to either European Parliament or our states' parliaments. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But I guess that the journalist didn't correct her. So that shows all, among other things, that shows that still education about that very basic statistics and knowledge is still very, very needed.
Yes.
Thank you. I have some propose because we are talking about the family rights. But for example, in Scandinavia and Norway, they looks like on the family rights on the another way. Actually, they are talking not about the family rights, but for example, parents' rights and children's rights. And they think and they looks like at always children's rights are to the opposite to the family to the parents' rights. And there always is conflict. And I think that we have to be more precise what we think about the family rights. At children's rights and parents' rights, it's not always in the conflict. Because Norway use Norwegian fund to export this ideology to the many countries, for example, in Europe, in the Middle and Eastern Europe. And what kind of results it is that, for example, there are 36 cases in the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg against Norway because this is apparently violations of the Article 8 rights to the family. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to refer actually to both remarks. As when it comes to Miss Spurek, I think that she's just a very good example of a much broader problem, since it's about irrationality of the politics. Irrationality of the public discourse that is just growing, very often under appearances of fact-based approach to politics. This situation with an MEP citing statistics without even referring to any source, but claiming that it's the fact, it's something typical. And once the notion of the truth has been left aside in this postmodern period, every single observation is more and more reduced to the value of opinion. So, of course, we are referring to reality to a certain extent, but some people confuse opinions with facts more and more often. So I think that politics has gone more irrational than it has ever been in the past. I remember that, of course I don't remember it from my own experience, but back in the 17th century, the British idea of parliamentary sovereignty was described in short terms that Parliament can do virtually anything except for turning a man into a woman. You know, right now it doesn't make sense, of course, since it's no longer considered an absurd. It's considered a serious subject to public debate, and not in context of medicine, since there are, of course, conditions regarding the sexual identity of a man, but in terms just of ideology and free will of those who want to change their sex. And as regards the second remark, I think it's the very core of the problem of family rights right now, that we are put in not only in individuality, in a discourse that is individualistic, but in a discourse that's post-Marxist, that in a discourse in which people are primarily considered as conflicting individuals. So there's no longer a common good somewhere out there as a core of our discussions and actions. But it's just about a conflict between a man and a woman, and the marriage between parents and children and the family. If we look back, if we turn to our history, we'll recognize that it's just the same model that has described how society works in terms of a conflict between owners and non-owners of private property. It's just very simplistic description of any community as a space of where interests conflict. So this is what has been used as a description of society, and in the past, right now, is referred to the family, to relations between children, parents and children, to relations between a husband and a wife, and so on. And if we discuss the idea of family rights, it's about overcoming this false ideology. It's about overcoming those errors, those intellectual errors based in Marxism. Since we have to remember that we are both individuals with our own individual rights, but we are also parts of a higher community, of a basic community like family, and it's also vital. It's not just secondary to the individual nature that we have. And it's very important to understand that, of course, there's the best interest of the child, the best interest of a parent, we can say, but in order to combine them and to realize them, it's not only about confronting two individuals, but but recognizing, acknowledging that they're part of a unit which also has its best interest in certain sense.